Was it a ghost, or something else? When I was about 11 years old, my uncle, my dad's brother, died. He had just had a house built and, since it was new, my parents decided to take over the payments and move in. We moved, reluctantly on my part, and I began going to school. The house is small. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom place. When you enter into the living room from the front porch, you can go to the left, down a short hall to the bedrooms and bathroom. The bedroom on the back of the house belonged to my dad. Neither myself nor my mother wanted to sleep in there, since that is where my uncle's dead body had been found. So both my mom and I shared the larger bedroom. This particular room was L-shaped because the hall only went back so far and stopped in front of the door of the back bedroom, leaving a cubby inside the larger room. That cubby was where my mom placed her bed. Mine was against the wall parallel to hers, so of the two of us, I had the view of the door. The three of us had lived in the house for a few months. Almost a year, at the time that the following happened. I woke up around 3 or 4 a.m., had gone to the bathroom and, as was usual with my mom, when I had woken up, she did as well. I had been a sickly child, so she was always worried about me. She asked her usual question of, "Are you okay?" And I replied that I was fine. We were both laying in our respective beds, trying to fall back to sleep, when I heard them footsteps. At first, I thought I was hearing things. It was the middle of the night and I was sleepy, so my brain must have been playing tricks on me. Shaking my head, I happened to glance over at my mom, and she was frozen, leaning up on her elbow and motioning for me to be quiet. So, she had heard them too. The steps sounded as if they were coming from the vicinity of the back door, which automatically made us think that someone had broken in. They certainly didn't belong to my dad, as we could hear him snoring away in his bedroom on the other side of the wall, and my mom and I were the only other people in the house. Slow measured steps, thump, 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 walked into the kitchen, thump, 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 thump. They made it to the living room. When they hit the carpeting on the living room floor, it sounded as if the feet were purposefully dragging across the floor, as if they wanted to be heard. Scoot, 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 scoot. During all of this, I remember murmuring to my mom that I was scared, and her vigorously trying to get me to be quiet. Scoot, scoot, scoot. The steps stopped about 4 or 5 feet from our bedroom door. Now, because my mom and I both suffered from asthma, we often slept with the bedroom door open, because we didn't like to be in enclosed spaces. So, the door was open and, as I've said, of the two of us, I'm the one with a view out the door. There I was, an 11-year-old kid, laying in bed in the early morning hours, breathing as shallow and as quiet as I could manage, waiting for whoever, or whatever, it was to show itself around the corner. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15, and we heard nothing else. Nothing showed itself and we didn't hear any more steps, so I finally calmed down enough to drift back to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up at my usual time, and, as I'm sure my parents had already done, went through the house and checked the front door. It was locked. The windows in the living room and kitchen were locked and in place. The back door, where we had first heard the steps, was also locked. I should note here that one of the first things my parents did, when moving into the house, was change the locks on the doors. My uncle had been a bachelor, after all, and there were rumors of keys floating around out there in the ether, so changing the locks was a must. The only people who had keys to the new locks were my mom and my dad, and we never hid a key outside either, so we ended up writing it off and forgetting about it for years. It was just an unexplainable event of which we couldn't understand the cause. Fast forward several years, by this point, a couple of things had happened in my life. 1. I had graduated high school and was in my first semester of college, so I had moved out of the house and was living on campus. And 2. My mom's health had declined significantly. Mentally she was still sound. She wasn't taking medications to cause hallucinations or anything of the like. Physically though, She was in a wheelchair with several other health issues that had to be addressed on the daily. So, when I was there on the weekends, I would care for her, and in between she had a home health nurse coming in to care for her. So, in order to make things easier and more manageable, we had turned the living room into a makeshift bedroom for my mom, setting up an old hospital bed for her, so the home health nurse had room enough to care for her because, as I've said, the house was small and the bedrooms even smaller. My mom was still capable of doing a lot for herself. She wasn't entirely helpless, so being in a larger room assisted her movement. Anyway, I was on my college campus one day, having just finished up my morning classes, when my cell phone rang. It was my mom. I answered, of course, and we went through the usual conversations of "Are you doing okay? How are classes going?" etc. And then my mom went quiet. This was unusual for her, as she was the type of person who could start up a conversation with anyone, anywhere, anytime. The complete opposite of myself. In a slight panic, I asked her if something was wrong. No, nothing's wrong," she replied. "It's just that something happened and I'm not sure if I should tell you about it over the phone." Now I'm in full panic mode, thinking that something about her health had declined even more or someone else in the family was sick. She assured me that wasn't the case and just told me that she would explain when I came home that weekend. So we wrapped up the call and I put the strange part of the conversation out of my mind until that Friday evening. I made it home, went in and hugged my mom, and sat myself down on the sofa across from her bed. We had several conversations before I got around to asking her about what had happened and why she didn't want to talk about it on the phone. She told me the following: "I woke up the other night, went to the bathroom, and ended up sitting on my bed. I was getting ready to lay back down and go back to sleep, when I happened to glaze into the kitchen." She explained, "I saw a figure standing in front of the sink, looking out the window. There's a small window above the kitchen sink. Now, I thought that I was seeing things, so I looked away and rubbed my eyes, and when I looked back, the figure had turned and was looking at me." She paused here, seeming to be rather apprehensive, and I urged her to go on. "It was the figure of a man," she said. "He was dressed in old-fashioned overalls, like railroad workers used to wear. He was skeletal thin, so thin that he could have just been bones. The skin was hanging off of the cheekbones of his face, and when I looked at his eyes, there were just two black holes where his eyes should have been." The figure had then disappeared. My mother lived another couple of years after that incident and we would often talk about it. Eventually we linked the figure and the footsteps together. An elderly neighbor, who had grown up in the community, eventually told us that our house had been built beside the area through which the railroad used to run. There had apparently been a house in the location before, years ago, in which an old couple and their children had lived and died. The neighbor also informed us that the old house was on one side of the railroad, and their graves had been on the other. Since then, there have been nights where I've fallen asleep on the couch in the living room of what is now solely my dad's house, only to be woken up to the sound of footsteps walking by. I've yet to see the eyeless figure, and there's a part of me that hopes that I never do.